Dear Tragedy Class, this is me trying to make up for the missing Uncle Vanya video, which I keep trying to upload, and they keep saying, no, we rejected it, or it's unavailable. We already tried. I don't know whether or why they would accept this, but I'm going to try again. I've scribbled down some notes reminding me of what I spoke about in that first video. The second video, if that's all you've got or had, leaps to the end of the play and talks at length about what, age 14, I found to be the extraordinary beauty of the end, in which the heartbreak of the two remaining central characters, Uncle Vanya, who's about 47, and his niece, who's supposed to be 27, their grief, they're working to try and keep their mind off the fact that they are heartbroken. Vanya thinks he's just missed the love of his life, the opportunity of his life. Sonia, who is in love with the doctor, is having to come to terms with the fact that she's a plain Jane. He doesn't find her beautiful. He'll never be seduced by her charms in the way that he was by Professor Serebriakov's wife, Yelena. And at the end of the play, as I described, we are poised between their grief that we deduce from the fact that they're not talking about it, as always in Chekhov, and it's amplified by this auditorium of sounds, which remind us how the world goes on. So that the main complaints against Chekhov's writing stem from, or are exemplified by, I better take some water as people do on the podium, and I should drink it like Donald Trump does, with both paws. Yes, D.H. Lawrence exemplified many people's resistance to Chekhov by referring to Chekhov, this is quite Trumpian really, by a nickname of Willie Wetlegs. Sounds like Trump. But D.H. Lawrence missed the point. He was the author of ferocious and passionate novels, and his complaint was that Chekhov's characters were Willie Wetlegs. They were just whining about their lives and how boring that was. He does seem to have missed the point that what Chekhov is encouraging the audience to feel is exactly that. Oh, for God's sake, get up and get on with your lives. The revolution haunts his plays, the revolution that's about to happen. He died 10 years before it did, which would sweep away what Chekhov regarded with tender scorn as a useless class of people, landowners, a useless parasites, really, when the true workers should be given their land and they would stop whining and actually get down to work and make some serious contribution to society. And that was something that D.H. Lawrence didn't notice, that was really a huge theme of the play, was not, oh, these poor people, but actually these poor people should stop whinging and get off their sofas. And ironically, D.H. Lawrence, one of the great playwrights of the 20th century, when he wrote plays, they were just like Chekhov's. They were deeply buried tales of aborted lives, of wasted lives, the very same subject that Chekhov treated in his unique fashion. And it is Chekhov's contribution to the history of theatre that I spoke about originally in this first video, to try and set the scene a little for his plays. After a century of strange melodramas in which it was necessary to arouse a torpid audience's feelings with terrible stories and deaths and cruelty and people losing sight of their beloveds and then finding them dying in the gutter. And theatre had become really just entertainment of the crassest kind. And finally along came Chekhov with a new kind of theatre, in which, as he put it, people are having a meal and hearts are breaking. And you see it in Chekhov. You see through, past the getting on with it behavior to, what's actually destroying their emotions. What is destroying them. And their suffering is expressed obliquely. So this gave rise to a whole new style of acting, which was initiated by a man called Konstantin Stanislavski in a theatre called the Moscow Arts Theatre, which he founded, and which was really founded to showcase Chekhov's plays. It led eventually across the seas to America and became known as the Method. And method actors, such as Marlon Brando, have been succeeded by a new generations, Dustin Hoffman, Daniel Day-Lewis, actors who inhabit their characters so completely that they take them home and live them during the period of their performance, in order to be able to deliver to the audience the nuances that a conscious and deliberate acting would never bring with it. And this came into being because of Chekhov's plays, and Chekhov wrote for this new nuanced acting. His theatre is actually much more robust than it appears. As I think I mentioned in the second video, the characters are all supremely contradictory. Contradiction is the heart of all interesting narrative and interesting art and interesting psychology and interesting characterization. And Astrov, who is at the same time a wastrel and a drunk and a visionary, Yelena, who is at the same time what we would call in Britain a flibbertigibbet, an airhead, and an extremely perceptive person. The fact that these are in the same human being is Chekhov's undying contribution to theatre and to psychology, and perhaps is the central reason that his plays are so adored and performed all over the world, and that Chekhov himself is ranked with Sophocles and Shakespeare as part of the trio of the greatest playwrights who ever lived. So, in this play, as in most of his plays, he tells the story of the landowning class and its individual members, for whom he felt a great tenderness, despite their self-pity. They all felt, I think, that they could have been a Schopenhauer, a Dostoevsky, if circumstances had not prevented them. In this case, the circumstances being struggling to keep a farm going that belongs to Vanya's brother-in-law, the old professor who was once so admired, such a star, and who Vanya's sister married, and through whom the family acquired the professor's daughter by his first marriage, Sonia. And these are the two people who are in such misery at the end. These two poor characters who work themselves to the bone. No one can say that they are idlers, but they own all the land. It's land that could be perhaps more profitably being used and owned by peasants, by the people on the land. So when the professor and his new wife arrive for a visit, the new wife turns out to be an irresistible beauty. All work stops. Everyone's life is turned upside down. The doctor, Astrov, falls in love with the wife also with him, but she is not prepared to abandon her awful, tyrannical, boring husband, who she has married when she thought he was a star. She saw in him the star that people see. He was a celebrity, and she fell for him, as presumably Uncle Vanya's now dead sister, we don't know why, but prematurely dead, must have done as well. And in his old age, he becomes a maddening bore, as people do. So now, and she can see that, but she's an honorable woman. This is something that is not easily seen. She is one of the great characters of fiction because of those wonderful contradictions in her. And we reach the ending of the second act, the storm act, the nighttime act, when everyone's awake, it's too hot, the storm hasn't broken. The wonderful moment where Yelena, the professor's wife, tries to meet his endless complaints that he's not given his rights. He demands his rights. And she goes to the window and opens it and says, nobody disputes your rights. And then in a touch of supreme genius, Chekhov repeats the line, and she says again, nobody disputes your rights. And in that repetition, we feel the whole marriage is characterized by a genius in Chekhov of ability to convey things without saying them outright. That is his genius. That is what those plays are about. And in that nighttime act, all kinds of things happen. The doctor stays, and Sonia foolishly tries to get Yelena to ask Dr. Astrov whether he's attracted to her, to Sonia. And of course, Astrov thinks that this is a disguised pass at him being made by Yelena. Astrov is drunk, completely drunk. And the doctor is in agony, and that's Astrov's excuse for coming around in the middle of the night and seeing this beautiful woman. And then there's a wonderful scene at the end where the two girls, Sonia and the gorgeous Yelena, start to be honest with each other and confess. Yelena that she feels Sonia's angry, jealous eyes on her for having stolen away her father, and Sonia that she feels that Yelena despises her as a plain girl. And they resolve that in the most beautiful and touching way. And one of them says, maybe Yelena says, wouldn't it be wonderful to have some music? Oh, we better check with the professor, whether he's sleeping or not. He might not want it. Will you go? And Sonia goes off to see if her father will permit them to play music in the middle of the night. And Yelena's left alone on stage to make a little soliloquy, which still exists in Chekhov from time to time. People alone on stage talk, speak, as it were, speak their minds, speak out of their inner thoughts, because they're never really alone, ever in the history of theatre, because we're there. We're there with them. They must speak. So because the speaking is what theatre is about. And so it leads to this extraordinary moment which seems so drab on the page, so anticlimactic. And then when you see it played, it lifts, it elevates to the skies. It's very special magic, because Sonia comes back after a while. Yelena is alone there thinking that she's going to play and sing and cry. And Sonia enters, and there's a moment. And then comes the last line of the act, where Sonia says, "We mustn't." And there are many ways of playing then that ending. That's where it ends. Sometimes they gaze at each other in mutual commiseration. The professor is a tyrant, and he's a tyrant over both of them. And in a sense, it bonds them. But I have seen it played wonderfully where, although Chekhov didn't put that in the stage directions, I think he would have loved it, where they both burst into laughter at the absurdity of life and at how much they share and at the joy of their having found each other, forgiven each other. Yelena's forgiven Sonia for the hateful stares that Yelena feels she receives, and Sonia for what she feels is Yelena's contempt for her. So there is that moment of purest magic, wrought out of nothing. And that I think, if you can imagine for a moment, because plays, particularly in the realistic tradition that Chekhov wrought to a pitch which has barely been transcended, they're almost nothing on the page. You can be very literal with a play that grabs a piece of the headlines and slaps it on the stage, but to create something as exquisite, contradictory, magical, surreal as the world that Chekhov creates is an entirely different business from a slice of the news. Anyway, I'm just glancing at what I wrote, scribbled down about the play, and I can't follow it. I can't even read. But I think I've conveyed most of what I hoped to convey. It's important to remember that the Russian Revolution, was coming, and it's not that Chekhov failed to notice. He knew All of Russia knew. It wasn't just Lenin arriving at the Finland station in his locked train. It was on the way because Russia was an antiquated world that needed social change and needed to move towards social justice. So it lies behind the play and its attitudes. And in many ways, I think you should think about the thwarted lives, of the disappointments for someone like Sonia, who's going to have very few choices in life. Like most people in most of the history of humanity, only met a few people who were potential mates. It's no speed dating. And Vanya, who maybe he could have been a Dostoevsky or a Schopenhauer, but all of us who aren't have to accept in as good spirit as we can the disappointments that life brings. But it's worth noting, I think, that in Chekhov's plays, love, individual love, the love of one individual for another, the fulfillment to be found through another, is what people long for, as if it was a flying saucer, a spaceship that would descend and transform their lives. It is the thing that will save them from the tedium of life. They don't see, as the revolutionaries saw, perhaps exaggerating their solution, but they believed, as all socialist revolutionaries have believed, is that what's missing in people's lives is not the perfect mate. It's a society in which you are far more widely fulfilled than just grabbing one person and running away with them towards your heart's fulfillment. And that love, in this sense, of course, if you go far enough into socialism, love itself can be under attack as a bourgeois emotion, because it can defy and resist, in order to preserve itself, the need for social justice, which is not done 2 by 2 or 1 by 1, or not only. It may start at home, but it has to reach out to the wider world. And this Chekhov understood, and D.H. Lawrence failed to see the compulsion in that in Chekhov's plays. Yes, his characters complain about the disappointments of their lives, but we are required by Chekhov to look further, to say, well, maybe the solution is not what these people think it is. It's like Sonia's speech at the end, where her solution is the angels. Her solution, in her misery, she's embraced religion as consolation. And the consolation that the angels will bring, that saves her from the almost tragic tedium of her life. And this, in some ways, is what has become of Athenian tragedy. The tragedy of tedium, the tragedy of unfulfilled lives, something that would never have appealed to Sophocles to write about. He was concerned with the violent clash between competing laws, between family and law, the things that ultimately caused bloodshed, that killed people. Chekhov is saying equally awful, if not worse, are these wasted lives. These are not tragic lives, except in the sense that he is offering you, here is a tragic waste of human potential. And if you see the plays performed, especially if you see them performed by a Russian troupe, it's hilariously funny, not only when Vanya tries to shoot the professor and misses twice, but all the time, these characters are in potentially hilarious situations. The English it's taken them a long time to catch up, and they saw Chekhov's wonderful but terribly sad. He's terribly sad and terribly funny. And therein lies his sublime genius, which hardly any other writers have managed to even approach. So I've gone on 5 minutes longer than I intended. I get carried away by Chekhov. I hope some of you will too, because for me it was like coming home when I read Uncle Vanya. I thought, this is it. This is how people are. This is how I am inside. I am all these people. an overwhelming sense of recognition, which other people feel exactly the opposite. Who are these boring, self-flagellating, self-pitying people? So there you have the contrast in responses. I hope it's not too boring for you to read another of his plays next week. Bye-bye, my dears. Stay safe. Be well.